think we should start on time. Good morning, everyone. It's 9:30, so it's time for ALLDISPATCH to start. Unfortunately, being the first session of the meeting, we have a sort of a crossed video problem here, where if you join the ALLDISPATCH room with the full client, you'll see the slides, but you'll see an empty presenter area because it's actually tied into the next room currently, and that's they're switching the streams. So hopefully that'll resolve itself pretty soon, and we can get going with that. I think we can start with the introductory information, at least just kind of working from the talking off of the slides, and those of you with the full client will be able to see that. And I see some things changing on the thing there. So anyhow, so I will kind of verbally do the note well. I hope that's sufficient for everyone, but we always start, especially at the beginning of the meeting, since we can't just like we do on the last day, sometimes sort of say, you've all seen the note well. You haven't seen the note well recently. So you're reminded that IETF has a number of policies that apply to our meetings, that you're going to follow the IETF processes, that there are a number of rules regarding IETF contributions that are covered by patents and so forth, and you are required to disclose any of those that you are aware of if you're participating in the discussion and it deals with that information. Your participation will be recorded here. There's a privacy statement that applies to personal information that you provide, and as a participant or attendee, you're expected to work respectfully with others. And then there's a list of various BCPs that I won't read, but are available on the slide if you're on the full client. We have a second slide now, which applies to professional interactions here. There are a number of anti-harassment procedures, guidelines for conduct that we expect to be followed. If you feel that you are being harassed or notice that someone else is being harassed, there is an ombuds team that is here to address that, and that IETF takes those things very seriously. So please sign into the session via data tracker. The QR code, I guess, is outside. We can't really display it on the screen because we don't have the right screens. But and then use. Oh, things are happening on the screens here. Hey, it is there. Okay, yay. So use Meet Echo. We're going to use that to manage the queue. That's important since we're a hybrid meeting, and we want to be fair to the people that are remote and not have them simply pushed to the back of the line by people that get up and haven't entered the queue properly. Please keep your audio and video turned off, and if you're a remote participant, we'd like you to use a headset if you can. That really helps the audio for those of us in the room here. We've been asked to point out that IAB has a new thing. There is a help desk that is an experiment to try and also help people that have new work to bring to IETF, to understand kind of the procedures for doing that and how to get started. Those are open Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday afternoons at various times that are on the slide here. And you're welcome to come by if you have new work that you'd like to bring to IETF and are not sure how to do that. one of the things that we would like to emphasize here is that, we've got a number of different topics. We've got very limited time, 12 minutes per topic. And we're really focusing here not on the technical details or the administrative details of the task that's being discussed. We're really looking for a presentation that sort of describes the type of work that the presenter feels should be addressed by IETF, and we're trying to simply direct that in the right direction. We don't want to get into any more detail than we need in order to have people understand the type of topic that we're trying to dispatch. So really the question here is not to discuss the topic. The question here is the meta discussion about where to discuss the topic. And here are the agenda items that we have for today. There's a space before the last two. The first topics there are mostly in the general area, and the last two are sec? Yeah. Okay. Is there any agenda bashing that people would like to do on this? Okay, and I believe that we have a note taker, Tiro. Thank you very much for volunteering. And others are, of course, welcome to contribute on the tool as well. And that's that. So the first presenter, several of our presenters here are remote. The first presenter here is Karsten, who, oh, that isn't Karsten, that's Karsten. And so Karsten, I will present slides for you. Is that the way you'd like to do it, or would you like
if you can pass me the controls, I can slog faster through them.
And pass control. Okay, so hang on just a second here.
Okay, thank you. So this is probably the most boring subject. So if you are not quite awake yet, stay asleep. This is about registry policies. And this is a draft that has been prepared by Carsten Burman, that's me, and by Marco Di Luca, who's stuck at the SCHIC meeting at the moment, so he can't come. We are co-chairing the core working group. So registries have policies, and we all know BCP 26 or RFC 8126 that gives us a number of canned policies that we can just refer to. So instead of inventing a new one each time a new registry is needed, we can refer to those canned policies. And the advantage of having canned policies is that everybody knows them. We can discuss them with their names. We don't have to describe all the details each time. They're easy to reference. The details are already fleshed out. People have had experiences with them before, and the document is a BIS document, so it has some detail in it. And also the interactions with other documents like the early allocation mechanism are well defined. Somebody has thought about that. That's really a useful thing to have. So we all love those well-known or canned policies. There is one little problem, however. These are essentially come in two variants. One where a designated expert approves the registration, and we all know about expert review and specification required, and one where a review body approves the registration. So RFC required, IETF review, standards action, ISG approval. And the problem really is that these are disconnected from each other. So you can have an expert look at it, you can have a review body look at it, but you never get both. Now, BCP 26 actually talks about combined policies, but really only seems to think about conditionals. So if an SDO wants this, you need specification required, otherwise you need IETF review. Something like that. That's the example given in the document. But combining them not as an if and else, but as an and, that's not provided. And that fails because some registries are complicated. You really need the expert who understands how this registry works. And well, the working group may be able to get this right, but then some registries are also meant to be used by other efforts in other working groups that may not even have people who know those details of the registry. So what we seem to need more and more is a logical and of expert review and one of the review body policies. Now, of course, we can write it up in our RFC. We have done that imperfectly because everybody does their own text and changes don't get copied and so on. It probably would be better to do this work once. So this is what this is about. What this is not about is 8126 bis. So that's also a nice idea, but really want to get this very little problem fixed. So the result should be a short document. The current draft has a 3-page body, and we don't think we need a lot more, but we could use a few eyes looking at it before we agree this is the text we're going to use. And we essentially need the cross product of 4.5 expert review and 4.7 to 4.10. So this is essentially what the content of this document would be, and it explains the responsibilities. So who of the players does what, and the BCP 100 procedure, the early allocation procedure. And now I'm asking you to dispatch.
All right, Lars is first in the queue. Oh.
It's getting hotter. Okay, great. First speaker from this mic, I guess, for the day. Oh, and it's really hot now. Hi, Carsten, this is Lars. So I'm wondering if you could explain to me why you would want to combine it, because in my mind, when you have a complicated registry and you need an expert, then you need an expert. Why would you then also want an approval body approval? Why wouldn't then the expert be enough?
Well, we could give the expert an instruction that they have to wait for an RFC to come out or something like that. But the other policies are well defined. So something like RFC required is supposed to throttle the requests. And we want to be able to use those together with the expert required.
What we mean by throttle the request? So RFC required means it needs to undergo review either in the IETF or in another stream, like could be independent.
Yes.
But if that's not appropriate, if you want an expert to be involved, why would you want then also to have some other gate afterwards? That's the thing I don't understand. If it's expert review, give the experts direction for what they should be doing, and that can be like, you know, wait until an RFC is out. I don't understand why you're complicating us to linking those two things that were previously completely unrelated.
Well, it helps if the various gating points know that they have a role in this. So this is just good advertising of what's supposed to happen. So we can bury it in the expert instructions, but the other policies are there for a reason. They are pretty good.
Because, for example, if you have expert review and ISG review, what if there's a disagreement? Right? I mean, sort of. Well,
it doesn't happen. They both have to agree.
But if they don't, so I'm worrying about complicating this unnecessarily, right? Either we trust the expert or we don't, and if you know, anyway, I think I said my piece and there's a queue, but I sort of worry about the implications of this sort of. It looks simple, but I think the devil is in the details.
Okay, Watson Ladd is next.
Hi, I think between this and the next one about IANA, I feel it got sent into the same place. I don't know if that's enough for a working group. I think it might take too long, but I think there is a need for wider discussion. So in answer to the dispatch question, I'm not really sure.
All right, John Clenson.
To respond partly to Lars's question, and noting Watson's comment that these two proposals are separate but related in terms of their origins of the RFC current ROC just not being quite good enough. But the issue is that for anything which is important enough to, in the community's judgment, require IETF review or ISG review or IETF consensus, we want to make certain that there's enough input into what may be very specialized issues to get that right. And it's not a matter of redundancy, it's a matter of making certain the right input is there. And if somebody has taken on the role of expert and watching the registry and all of the registrations, that person is going to have better perspective than the community as a whole, or even the ISG. And again, that makes these complementary rather than redundant or extra effort. Should they be used in all cases? No. But this we appointed a junior king and therefore, or junior queen, and therefore trust them is a whole separate set of issues and inappropriate for some registries. Thanks.
Okay, but let's, I've just closed the queue because we've gotten a decent sized queue. So please, let's kind of focus on the dispatch question, which is sort of like not trying to decide this issue, but sort of trying to decide how to decide this issue. Should this be a BOF? Should this be a working group? Should this be something that an AD decides or so forth? Dean Bogdanovich, please.
Yes, hi. So there is an expert review similar to this was proposed within the young doctors when they review the drafts that people submit. And there might be some other use cases where it's really worth it. And in my opinion, this would be something that the AD could decide if an expert review is really needed. And it could be like a group of experts that could be asked, something similar to young doctors, but in my opinion, it could be decided by the AD on a case-by-case basis.
Murray.
Speaking, just to answer the dispatch question, 8126 BIS and the next two documents together and the link to that queue is telling me this should probably be a small working group.
Barry Leba.
This is Barry Leba. Broadly, I agree with what Lars said. For the dispatch question, I think this absolutely needs a working group, partly because we've had a bunch of issues for BCP 26 queued up for a couple of years now, and I've been meaning to do an update to 8126 and haven't gotten to it. And then Murray said he would take it from me and do a draft, and he hasn't gotten to it. The community needs to get to it. So we need a working group to deal with this and the other accumulated issues with BCP 26.
All right, and Harold.
Harald Aldestrand. To be a bit more blunt than John was, we create registries. We create registries in the belief that the community will continue to use them and understand them. Sometimes we're wrong. Community review, even ISG review, often is not competent to run these registries that the community as a whole has forgotten about. So when we have that case, we need an expert on it. This is a change of process. So I think the right thing is, as you say, small, short working group, and don't let the short be 10 years. Go for it.
Okay, that finishes the queue. The referee to the room that I have here is create a small working group. Is that okay? I don't see anybody jumping up and down, so that's good. All right, let's move on to the next presentation, and that is John Clemson on hybrid IANA registrations. And I'm going to change the slides here.
This is ultimately, and if you could put up my slides, I appreciate it. There we go. Um, This is ultimately, in terms of dispatching, probably the same question as the other one. If we want a small working group for for one, then we want a small working group. It should include the other, and as Barry pointed out, should include a revision of the base document, which in some respects is the whole problem here. That base document is out of date relative to how things have evolved. Um, and so, as I say in the slide, the symptoms, both of these are symptoms of underlying problems. And the debate about those problems is probably best left to a working group. But to review this problem and where it differs from Carson's problem, we've got a tension in a growing number of registries between getting all of the uses registered to avoid naming conflicts and making that as painless as possible so it happens, and getting good advice, possibly consensus advice, from the IETF, or at least an expert, or the IETF and an expert, or some of the other combinations that would make sense given the standardized conventional methods in the RFC. We wrestled with this in email core and the revision of the SMTP specification, and came to the conclusion that the right option for those cases where there's a serious tension between the community and registrants wanting some serious review and our wanting those names registered no matter what, was to turn the problem over to the registrant. With the registrant could say, just a simple registration, going to be first come, first serve. The registry will probably indicate that it doesn't have IETF consensus, but is simply registration on that basis. Or some variation on IETF approval, of which the R8126 provides several different versions, including ranging from expert review to standardization. So the document discusses those things, and as I said earlier, it's probably better done in a revised version of 8126. But if that's years away or more promises away, then this is worth doing. Just as the previous draft under discussion is worth doing as a separate thing and then fold it in rather than permitting it to wait. And if we're going to do a working group, then I would hope that the working group would prioritize obviously needed short-term fixes over getting every possible nit with the base document fixed, although that could easily be up to the working group. Thank you. Almost all of Carson's comments about the general context and how these registries work are obviously being incorporated by reference, so we don't have to go through them again.
All right, Barry is first in the queue.
And only, it seems, Barry Liba. Yeah, of course, this belongs in the working group previously discussed. There is the issue of both Karsten's idea and this idea needing to have something done sooner rather than later, and it's going to take a while to get BCP 26 BIS done at this point. But I think it would be, I don't think it would be good use of an AD's time to AD sponsor this. What I would like to see is maybe charter a working group to deal with the overall larger issue and have its first order of business be to deal with a couple of specific things that it can sort of burst out as temporary fixes while it's working on the broader document.
Yeah, I think that's consistent with what I just suggested.
Somebody else in the queue that didn't enter the queue via the tool. So do you have the ability to enter the queue?
No, I don't.
All right, then please announce who you are.
Amanda Baber, IANA.
Okay.
Just as sort of a public service announcement, these procedures are currently in use, chaining things together with expert review. And this hybrid procedure can be built at any point. In fact, the provisional registration procedure described in 413 is very similar to this, but doesn't require a specific procedure for provisional, specific for permanent.
Any opinion about dispatch in this work?
No, we were talking to Murray yesterday about opening this up. So if he supports moving this to dispatch, yeah, we certainly want more community input. We support that.
Harold?
Oh, never mind.
Harald Alstrand, Chair of Media Man. The approach of emitting small documents that make small changes and then wrapping them all up in a big update at the end is what we're presently trying in Media Man. And I think it's a workable approach. And the only thing is you need to get a working group chair that is really good at whipping things along. Thank you.
So Barry Lieba, who nodded vigorously at what Harold just said. But just to reply to what Amanda said, yeah, we definitely can do this now, do any of these now with words in a document that combine BCP 26 mechanisms. But I have sympathy for both what John and Karsten have said, that they don't want it to be done differently in every document, and then that's cast in stone. Even though we're about to formalize it. So there's some value in putting out a little small document that says, if you're going to do this, this is how you do it until we get it rolled into BCP 26.
All right, John Clinton.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to what Barry just said is that there is nothing about what either Karsten suggested or what I am suggesting that is provisional. Once we open 8126, my guess is that the whole provisional question is going to come under review and be fairly controversial. But that's a whole different set of issues for the working group.
Okay, Murray, I see you're standing up. I had a question. I had a question for you. Was you had volunteered in the chat to work on a charter? Can your charter include both of these things? If I can.
Now you're going to get me with the mic on. Damn it. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so it seems that the result, as at least the feeling that we are getting, that the room wants to establish a work group to address this, those two kind of topics. Anybody has a problem with this? Like any opposing views?
Okay, so the next presentation is from Mallory about gender representation in NOMCOM. And trying to figure out how to grant. No. Where's this? This one. There we go. That button has multiple uses, doesn't it?
Did you share the slides?
She's sharing. All right, go ahead, Mallory.
All right. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Sad I couldn't be with you in person. This presentation should be relatively short. The draft is on non-com gender representation, and the draft initially has been around since, I think, February maybe, but this is the first time I'm presenting it to you. So this is just a copy paste of the abstract. The document extends the existing limit on non-com representation by company in order to improve gender diversity by ensuring that not all voting members of the IETF nominating committee belong to the same gender. Really, really explicit goal. There are a lot of non-goals. We might get into them, we might not, but the goal is there are just no more men-only non-coms. So the document, again, is pretty short. It's only 3 parts. Well, 4 if you count the privacy considerations, but the introduction just makes 2 very brief claims that are backed up with a citation for background argumentation purposes only. The first is the lack of gender diversity and hiring teams in particular reinforce underrepresentation of gender minorities in leadership positions, which is what the non-com is supposed to be doing. And the second is that the lack of gender diversity in leadership positions perpetuates gender discrimination. The second part of the draft is really about how the IETF should be thinking about this. So I present a few, just 3 really brief arguments that we already do in this community. Think about this and have made some important changes to our processes. The first is that almost all the non-com questionnaires, at least those I've ever seen, they ask about how the candidate would handle or think about diversity in the IETF. In the discussion that has happened on the list already, the Gen Art list, folks have raised that, you know, this draft doesn't really do very much. It's quite a minor change. I think we needed to clarify there in the second version that this change really is a sort of least or like minimum requirement. There may be other things we can do and we should do them, but this is really focused on one, trying to keep the scope narrow. And then the last thing that I changed in the main part, the main section of the draft is around tracking. So there was quite a lot of discussion, as one could predict, about, you know, well, how do we know and how do we track this? And is this requiring that everyone's gender be registered and that sort of thing? And I think I made it really explicit in the draft. This should not require that. And then the last part is the remedy. What do we do? So the real basic suggestion is just that we update RFC 8713 to extend the skip rule. The 2 per organization limit in the non-com, just, you know, you skip the 10th or 11th or 12th slot, depending on how big your non-com is, if all of the candidates up to that point are of the same gender. And I will just use one example that came up recently, why this would matter. My organization has a policy that when we are asked to be on panels, for example, and the panel is all one gender, you know, a manel is sort of colloquial phrase for it, we have to say no, right? Unless you can get a more gender diverse panel. This isn't that necessarily, this isn't a panel, but I think more and more companies and organizations do have policies about participating in non-diverse, non-gender diverse situations and how to remedy that. So this could be one example. And lastly, the privacy considerations section does talk a little bit about the tracking piece. So I just wanted to put that on the screen in case folks wanted to come to the mic to talk about that. I wanted to just, on the dispatch question, because I don't have a final slide, I just wanted to say, like, again, this draft is from a while back. I didn't present it at the 119 ALLDISPATCH because I imagined it would be rather straightforward to get. Well, it's clearly a general area, right? It seemed like AD sponsored would be sort of the only way to sort of deal with this, but I didn't get feedback or response from either of the chairs at that time, so then Lars and then so yeah, so I don't know. That's why I came to 120 to ALLDISPATCH, because I hadn't gotten a response on a way forward for this draft yet, even though there has been some Gen Art list activity. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Dean is first in the queue.
So just as a NOMCOM chair for this year, having experience trying to ask people to volunteer for NOMCOM, it's end up being almost like a begging process. This is not the first time because every time there are like multiple calls for volunteers, and then you send out emails to the working group chairs. Hey, can you please say to your working groups if people are not following the ITF or the IETF announcement? And you end up with a, let's say 100 to 200 volunteers. And the more conditions you're putting onto volunteers, sometimes you might not get the best selection because people will say, okay, I'll just throw my head into it. And then the other problem is that we in general as an organization do not attract when many non-male participants. And this reduces the participation pool. And then you have a conflict that if people volunteer for NOMCOM, they can't volunteer for the leadership positions.
Right.
So, and there are here, it would be great to have much wider pool of volunteers to become voting members. That's one part that in general the community should taking, hey, if you want to participate, you want to make sure that you are participating in the leadership selection and be more open to that. And the second part is, it's more, again, it's more general rule for the ITF, how we can make this environment more friendly to non-male participants. Yes. And then this will then go down through all of the parts of the organization. For
Okay,
NOMCOM
Dean?
to follow that rule will be a little bit hard.
Yeah, could
Yeah.
we need to focus down a little bit more on what the right venue is to decide the questions that you're talking about rather than to discuss those yourself. Do you have an opinion about, should this be a working group or how should this be handled?
I mean, this is just a wider question than just NOMCOM. It's about the overall participation. So and the question is how many people would participate in a working group like this? That is different. It would be nice to have that general working group to decide how we can encourage wider participation within our community. And that has been an open question for a really long time.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I would just respond very quickly to say that you were talking about how it's difficult to convince people to, you have to beg people, right? But imagine now with policies like my organization have that are becoming more popular, people actually say, I'm sorry, I have to decline because my company has a policy that I can't join panels or compositions that are all one gender. I have to actually say no. So you actually are potentially narrowing the pool of people who can say yes without having some guarantee that there will be at least some gender diversity. Okay, that's all I wanted to respond to.
Okay, Dan Harkins is next in the queue.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Mallory. Can you go back one slide? So I read your draft, and in section 2, you say gender diversity has been shown to lead to more productivity and creativity. Now, I think a statement like that needs to have a reference that's credible, that's relevant to the IETF and not behind a paywall. So you should probably add that to your draft. Now, I do have an issue with 1B here. I don't think that the demographic makeup of the non-com, if it doesn't statistically match the demographic makeup of the pool from which they're drawn, necessarily means that there's gender discrimination. That's the residual fallacy, and I don't think we should be compelling the IETF to do decisions based upon fallacious reasoning. Finally, I'd like to note that your suggested remedy, modifying the 2 per organization limit, that reminded me of something. A little over 3 years ago, I wrote a draft in section 4.3 of my draft. My draft was about diversity and inclusion in the IETF. In 4.3, I mentioned using this rule to create a more diverse non-com. So I guess I should be flattered that you're making the same suggestion, but the problem was my draft was an April Fool's draft. It was sarcasm, and I think you're serious. So my suggestion to dispatch this is to the round file. I don't think we should do anything with this.
All right, Barry.
This is Barry Leva. I'll start by saying I take offense to what Dan just said. Continuing to the point, I can't think of a simpler, more straightforward, obvious thing to do. And Mallory, thanks for writing this up seriously. For the dispatch question, I hope we can do this through AD sponsorship. I would hate to go through the weight of a working group to get this done.
Thanks,
Thank
Barry.
you. Ted.
Thanks very much. For the dispatch question, I do think this does need a working group because I think there are some aspects of this where we need to focus on how we're going to tackle the problem to make sure that this doesn't become kind of a go-to for other types of diversity, particularly geographic diversity. I do think there are also some other potential ways forward for this that take similar approaches. Like if you have constructed something as a panel, one way to do it is keep adding people to the panel until it is gender diverse, as opposed to replacing people who are already on the panel. So I think there are ways to do this that don't affect those that are chosen by random lot in the first set of 10 by saying, you keep growing the non-com till it is gender diverse. So I think we can focus on the problem, take it to a short-lived working group, and deal with it there. Given the history of changes to non-com documents, I think AD sponsorship is probably not appropriate in my personal opinion. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Martin Thompson.
Yeah, Martin Thompson. I realize that there are some people who think that other aspects of diversity require equal measures of consideration and can see the complexities that Ted's talking about, but I think I disagree with Ted. I think that there are dimensions along which we have significant problems in this organization, and this is an opportunity to fix that relatively quickly. And I would agree with Barry's disposition on this one, rather than Ted's approach. I don't think we need to worry about geographic diversity as much as we need to worry about gender diversity. This is a relatively straightforward fix. I have some minor questions about how exactly it's executed in terms of managing the privacy aspects of it, but I think that can be done relatively quickly.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Rich.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I too also agree that there are other axes of diversity, and I think that with any approach to actually improving diversity, it requires a lot of attention and it requires the right strategy. And so I don't think that one size fits all. So that's why this change is for gender, and there would be other changes for other things. Thanks.
Rich Sauls, former NOMCOM chair. I think I still hold the record for size of nominees, number of nominees. Resurrect the Elegy group as we did for the previous NOMCOM eligibility changes and send it there. This is important. Clearly, there's a variety of opinions, and AD sponsored would not be appropriate. We need the whole IETF to have a chance to say something. Having said that, I hope it passes.
Thank you. Colin.
Colin Jennings, I think it's really important work, and I thank you for doing it, Mallory. I think we do need to make things better, and we need to focus on this important problem. So because of that, I would like to see it done in a working group that was scoped purely to gender diversity. I'm not saying other things don't need to be dealt with, but I think we should deal with this one first, and it would be the easiest to scope it down. And the second thing is I feel fairly strongly that we just had an illustration in the room of why I don't want to be trying to determine consensus on this with an AD on the IETF at IETF last call list. I think that's what basically rules out doing this as AD sponsored, is just the bad behavior of and way that we handle these things. So I would much rather see us do it in a working group that was narrowly scoped to solving this problem of gender diversity. Thank you.
I feel you on that, Colin, but 1 second. I did want to ask, because you said you wanted to look at a working group that looked specifically at gender diversity, but I wondered if you meant gender diversity across the IETF, gender diversity in the NOMCOM, gender diversity in leadership. Like, is there any further scoping on that?
I'm a little bit vaguer on that, but I would want to see their first mile. I think that the way you laid it out of, we start with the interview committee, then we move down to leadership, then we move to the next leadership, all those things would be fine. I wouldn't care if it only was chartered to do the first step of that process or all the steps of that process, as long as it was clear that it was going to do the first step first. And I think that you've got the right direction for the first step as it is.
Thanks.
Thank you. Christian.
Christian Wiedemer. I agree with the growing consensus that this has to be done in a working group. It cannot be done by edict. The reason is that the NOMCON process uses a drawing of lots process at random. And that process is very nice in that it does actually capture the diversity of the pool. If we start biasing that process, there's a tension. Because if you bias that process, one kind of diversity pushes another. So that may be right. I did computation showing that, in fact, if we only add a bit more than 10% women in the pool, then basically we'll get Mallory's result almost by nature. So basically, there are tensions there. I dislike the idea of having a top-down process that says this is a category and slotting people. I
But
like
this sounds like a topic for the working group. That it sounds like we have consensus to do so.
Definitely there are many topics for the working group. It shall be a working group.
Okay, so let's take that there. Dean, you have something very quick because we're at
Just
time.
very quick. I just did a quick check. There were 15 non-male volunteers for NOMCOM this year out of 163.
Okay. Thank you. Sir.
Hi, as the responsible AD for this and the most likely, hey Mallory, the most likely AD to be asked
Thank you for
to
Mike.
kind of sponsor this document. I think given the kind of feedback we have and the kind of facilitation we're going to need to push this document and have this conversation, I would like the structure of a working group for this.
Hi, I know the queue is closed, but could I come in for a second? Yeah, this is Carolina. I'm a co-chair of Sisters, and I just wanted to react to Dean's point. So the Sisters group has recently launched a charter, and one of the goals that we are pursuing, or a couple of the goals, are encouraging members of the Sisters group to become active IETFers, and also sort of accompany or support members of the group in accessing leadership positions. So Dean, we can definitely work with the NOMCOM in getting those numbers up. So just wanted to flag, that we can collaborate with the Sisters group on that. Other than that, if I may, I would like to also express my support for the creation of a working group on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like there's pretty good consensus here for the creation of a working group. So I think that's taken. So thank you very much for the presentation, and let's move on to Elliot with list management procedures.
Do one thing, just quick. How about we appoint one female liaison for this, or non-male liaison for this NOMCOM? To add gender diversity, and then it can be a non-male liaison for the NOMCOM.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Elliot Lear. I'm here to talk about draft Lear BCP replacement and one other draft that is covering, bad behavior and how to deal with it. Next slide, please. So sometimes, of course, we all say things we shouldn't. Sometimes an action needs to be taken, and we have BCP 83 for that. We've now seen several instances of its use, and to ban people, both of them were extremely painful for all involved. BCP has a number of problems, limited flexibility. The public review process is just torturous. I think we all saw that. It was really demeaning. It didn't really preserve the dignity of the process, which I think was really a problem. And it requires excessive amounts of community resources in that process. So it's time for an update of BCP 83. Next slide, please. There are actually, so from my perspective, there were some goals here in terms of doing the update. One is, of course, to enforce the IETF Code of Behavior. I want to say that we don't specify that code. We just say if you violate it, that there are consequences. We try to preserve the dignity of the people involved, right? Not to have a public lynching or anything like that. We want to use the least restrictions necessary to accomplish the job, and we want to have an open process and let people participate in the standards process if at all possible, without disrupting the process itself, or otherwise discouraging other people from participating. We want to make sure that the cost to the community is limited, that changes should happen in a relatively fast time, so that, the consequences are at least proximate to whatever has happened. And we, of course, want the process to be transparent, provide privacy where possible and necessary, balancing that with transparency, of course, allowing for appeals, and not listed there are reviews. So next slide, please. There are two drafts, draft ECHC moderation. My dyslexia, by the way, keeps me from ever being able to reproduce that spelling as it happens. Now, this draft covers all IETF participation channels, not just the plenary mailing list, but all mailing lists and other forms of communication. It establishes a global team, and that's modeled over on how the existing moderation function works. And the draft says that the moderators themselves will propose and establish processes to meet the goals that the community sets. This draft is reasonably complete, but still there's some more work needed, and we definitely got some feedback on the mailing list about that. Second draft is draft Lear BCP 38 replacement, which is much more targeted towards the plenary lists that you see there. It does something new, which is it sort of delegates this function to the IETF executive director, so that things can happen a little more quickly, and he's actually reasonably well equipped to handle that. There were some objections to that on the mailing list as well. I think it's worthy of some discussion. There's some benefits of having the LLC involved versus not. It specifies transparency appeals and et cetera. It allows for broad authority for the function with review with that. And of course, there's some more work needed here. Now, this morning, the two author groups, or portions of the two author groups, got together. We see a lot of commonality. One of the reasons I initiated the draft was I thought that the other draft was actually dead. So it turns out there's so much commonality. I think we definitely want to combine forces, and that we see a perfect ability to do that. So next slide, please. So we think next steps are, one of them has already been done. Roman's created a mailing list. We want to lay out sort of the key differences, agree on the goals and the scope, right? Are we talking about just these plenary lists? Are we talking about everything? I think amongst the authors, we see room to do really everything, so long as lines of authority are clear, particularly if working groups are covered, then we need to worry about that. And then, sort of take the best of both works, or a mix of something else. And, we think this should be done in a working group. Well, everybody thinks that their work should be AD sponsored, right, Roman? And of course mine should be, right? Except nobody but me agrees with that. So we think a working group is appropriate. And Roman, do you want to make a comment or two on this?
Yeah, thanks for teaming me up, Elliot. I'll just repeat what I said in the closing of the last PR action that we have. The ISG believes we need strong community conversation on that. We don't per se know the answer to that, but we believe that the answer will come from the community. We are thrilled that there are multiple drafts to kind of choose from different options. We have created the mod discuss kind of mailing list. We observed lots of conversation there. We think that's very positive. We also believe that the resolution of the long-term fix to moderation will require a working group to get consensus on this. So we are supportive and stand ready to charter if the community wants that to happen.
Which I believe is the next question. Thank you. So does the community want that to happen, and do people have questions or comments?
So Harold is first in the queue.
So Harold Laudestjan, IETF chair at the time that this was BCP 83 originally landed. I was somewhat shocked to realize that it's still in force. The way it came about was that there was a discussion about suspending a particular noxious individual on the IETF list. Certain parts of the community claimed that there was no possibility of ever kicking someone out of the IETF, and we shouldn't have it. Other parts of the community agree that it should be possible. Among them, Marshall Rose. So I challenged Marshall Rose to write up a process that is so obviously painful that it will only be invoked when necessary. And the result was BCP 83. Okay. Now, this was kind of intended not to be used ever, but we need it. The point is, this is not holy writ. It needs replacing because the needs have changed. Let's rewrite it. Let's have a working group.
Okay, well, thank you. We've got a lot of people in the queue, which I'm going to close pretty quickly, but please focus, especially if you have any disagreement with the idea that a working group is needed for this, we'd like to hear from you. But other than that, please just keep your comments very short and to the dispatch question. Ron.
I'm listed as an author on one of these, basically tagged along. I'm one of the last call moderators. We've had 2 PR actions that have gone to the last call list. In both times, it has been what could be adequately described as a shit show. It was it's a really bad process. It's not effective. It's not good for the community. It's not good for achieving results. So we certainly need to change it to something else. They're the only times I've ever had to moderate anything in the last call list. Everything else has been very well behaved. But when PR actions come up, everyone's bad behavior comes out. It's not the right way to do it. It's not fair on the person having the PR action put on them, and it's not fair on everyone else either.
Thank you. David.
+1 to Bron. Thank you to the authors of your draft and to the authors of the other draft. I think both of them have really good ideas. Our working group is the right place to hash out what we want the actual solution to be, but let's do this, and I'm willing to help.
Thank you. Dan Harkins.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, Elliot. I agree that I think that this whole process is ugly and toxic. It goes on for a month, and there's a huge piling on period where everybody on the IETF list does a Me Too, and that causes the target to feel that some of these things has to get responded to, which creates all these toxic sub-threads that go onto the main thread, and the whole thing just gets completely out of control. So we really do need to address this, and I thank you for doing this. And yes, there probably does need to be a working group.
Thank you. Martin.
Yeah, I think Bron said what I wanted to say, and I forgot to get out of the list. Thank you to everyone who's doing this work. It's very important.
Thank you. Andrew Campling.
Hi, Andrew Campling. I think this absolutely needs to be done. Very happy to help. I'd urge that we look at some of the equivalent documents from other groups, such as RIPE. I think there's some good things we could learn from there. I would also urge that we don't ask the LLC exec director to do this. I think that will be a poison chalice, and he wouldn't thank us for it, in my view. The community needs to own this, not delegate it to somebody else. Thank you.
Andrew, just one request of you, which is if you have pointers that you want to share about how others do this. If you could just post those to the mailing list, that would be very nice.
Sure. Great. Nick Doty.
Plus one for thank you, and I'm fine with a working group or some other approach. My comment was that I do think we should take the slightly broader scope of applying to not just the plenary lists, although I certainly think that is an urgent area for discussion and improvement, but I think it would make it easier for people coming into the IETF if they had a pretty consistent moderation experience, no matter what list they ended up using.
Great. Thank you. Colin.
Hi, Colin Perkins. I agree we have a serious problem with toxic behavior on a number of our mailing lists. It is worse on the plenary lists than on the working group lists, but it does exist on some of the working group lists as well. I also agree that the BCP 83 process does not work. We need to do something better. To my mind, either of the current proposals are an improvement on what we have in BCP 83. I very much support a working group going forward to find a focused solution to this problem.
One comment, I think the way we want to write this, if at all possible, by the way, is that it can be easily adapted to the other streams, if, just as a side comment.
Yeah, I mean, the other streams have different moderation processes to the IETF stream, and the BCP 83 process doesn't apply there anyway. But yes, if there is a good solution which would apply to the other streams, I think that would be a good thing.
Thank you. Warren.
Warren Kamari, Google. So, as everyone has said, thank you very much for doing this. Clearly, somebody needs to do it. I'm fine with a working group. My only concern is I think we should deal with this quickly. And if there's a working group, there's a tendency for it to just drag on forever. So, short working group.
I think, by the way, Roman, what you just heard was a volunteer to be a chair.
Okay.
To repeat the position of the ISG, because we have discussed this kind of extensively, we are prepared to move fast. If folks have charter text, we think that would be great to put on the list. We would also be happy to sponsor interim BOFs. We do not need to wait to Dublin.
Okay, well, it seems fairly clear that this is a short duration working group, right? It's a working group. Aspirationally short duration, right? Okay, great. Adrian Farrell is next, talking about experimental RFCs.
Right, from something we hope won't happen very often and is important to something that doesn't happen very often and is arguably less important. Although an important note here, I wrote this draft with Ron. Ron has a new kidney this week and is going for it. So the draft that's out there is just a stake in the ground. You can't dispatch well without a draft, so we wrote one. There's a lot that could be improved in the draft. Let's not focus on that. Let's do the dispatch thing. So we're looking here at protocol experiments. Process experiments are a different kettle of ball games. And we're focused on the IETF stream. Hopefully other streams might tag along, but that's not what we're looking at. The chart here shows that there are not a lot of protocol experiment RFCs published over the last 5 years. And of those, only about 50% come out of the IETF stream. So why do this? Our view is that experiments are experiments. They're not end runs. They're not a way of putting your pet protocol into an RFC so you can get it into the field. They are genuinely experiments. And an experiment really does need to be properly scoped with essentially why are you doing it? How do you contain it and stop harming the internet? And all that lovely stuff. My experience is that authors generally do not properly describe experiments. partly because they don't know what they should say, partly because the working groups don't give them good advice. And it comes then to the AD very late in the process to push back and say, hey, you want this to be an experiment, describe it properly. And it seems to me wrong that we should be leaving it that late. Authors would do a better job if they had some guidance, not rules, just guidance. So how might we dispatch this? This is a list of things we might do. Our preferences are either, hey, AD sponsored, or a wiki page or web page. And I would say to that one that it opens up quite a can of worms about how do you get consensus for the wiki pages, and how do you move all sorts of other process documents to that format. And I would like this idea not to get stuck in that quagmire. But beyond that, over to this group.
Terrific, thank you. Torlis is first in the queue.
Thank you, Adrian. So correct me if I'm wrong, but this may not be describing the full extent of what we're calling experimental, right? Because we also do still have, I think, the ability to have experimental working groups. And I think the best two examples coming to mind from where I've been working are the LISP and the BEER working groups, which started out with technologies where in the beginning it wasn't entirely clear whether we felt confident enough for this to be called internet standards. And only after kind of the first phase of the experiments in the working group or so where these working groups upgraded to standard working groups, and actually the experimental RFCs also upgraded in their status. So when you're talking about these aspects, I think you're talking about the ones outside of a working group where experiments can also be done, right? Or are you not?
No, I'm not. I don't believe there is such a thing as an experimental working group. I think there is a working group that produces experimental RFCs.
Right, okay.
So we are talking about RFCs that are classed as experimental that contain protocol experiments.
Okay, so but basically during the chartering of a working group, you can also make statements about what, gold standards and or experimental the RFCs have, right? So in that respect, a particular dispatch isn't necessary for all of that experimental work.
Yeah, okay, this is not talking about dispatch for experimental work. This is talking about dispatching a description of what experimental work should include to describe an experiment. Okay, everybody can go off and do experimental, that's just great. However, what should the document actually contain? What advice are we giving to people about how to describe an experiment?
Do we have something comparable to what you're asking for here for standards track?
Nope.
Okay.
Colin.
Hi, Colin Perkins. I have been having similar conversations with authors of experimental documents going to the IETF stream for the last few years, and trying to make the descriptions of the experiments clearer. And I agree that this is something this community has not done very well in the past, and I think some guidance on what makes a good experiment, and particularly when that experiment should be considered a success, would be a useful thing to have. So I would support some work going ahead in this topic. I suspect that guidance might be slightly different for the different streams. An experimental document on the IETF stream is probably much nearer market, should we say, than an experimental document on the IRTF stream. So I'm not sure it's necessarily going to be the same guidance, but I think providing some guidance would be a useful thing. As to how to dispatch it, I would probably lean towards AD sponsored, but yet another targeted working group might not be a terrible idea. I don't think the independent stream or a wiki page or so on is appropriate here. Thank you.
Thank you. Colin.
So I want to talk about what I think should be out of scope for this for a second. I'm fine with a working group or something. I think it would be valuable to have some information that tells you how to run a good experiment. But the point I want to make from an out of scope point of view is right now, sometimes we use the experimental label to describe things that are actually experiments, which is fine. And this would help them, no problem about that. But we also use it to describe things which have not reached, which are basically a protocol specification, but do not have the level of consensus that we would normally expect to have for informational or something else. And I don't want to lose that use of experimental. I think that's a very valuable use. It gives us an outlet to lower the stakes on people and allow them to get a publication and RFC number on some certain things that probably should be published, but can't achieve the normal level of consensus you'd have for use on the internet. So, I think of it as BCP does not mean best current or practice. And also we have a 3-tier system with experimental, informational, and standards, PS as the 3 levels, right? I mean, we have used it that way. And that doesn't mean it can't also be used for experiments, like you're talking about real experiments here, which is great. But I don't want to lose the use of it in the other way that we've done it. So that's however we do to scope this. I just want to make sure that it doesn't redefine experimental to only be things that are actually experiments. Okay, does that make sense?
That does. And I think what you said could easily be captured in that kind of descriptive guidance.
Easily, yeah.
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 All right, and we've got a pretty good queue because we're gonna close it pretty quickly. Jonathan Lennox.
Yeah, to sort of amplify and add on to what Cullen said, sometimes, instead of my working group, by the time something finally gets through the working group process, it's clear that it's actually failed. The industry has suddenly said, but you still want to document it. So in some sense, that's a failed experiment. It's not an experiment. So I would say if you don't want such things described as experimental, including the things that Colin said, you should describe how they should be published. The things that you don't like being published as experimental today, you should say what they should do instead, because I think just not publishing them at all is not the right answer.
Yeah, advice on that might be really helpful, and reminding people about what historic is as well.
All right, Suresh.
Thank you. And thanks for writing this, Adrian. There's this piece about the experimental code points. It looks a bit wishy-washy in the text in the draft. And I would like something stronger which says, like, if there's an experimental code point, you probably have to define why you don't want to use it and go for another allocation. I think we don't see a lot of use of experimental code points. We just like burn other things and kind of not use them again. So I think if it has stronger text about using the experimental code points if they exist, that'll be really good. Thanks.
Does that affect how you would have this dispatched?
No,
Okay.
not that. But I think the text itself would like
just a question whether there was more discussion needed than AD sponsored or
no. I think it's good. Like the AD sponsored sounds good enough for this. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Torlis.
Yeah, I think Cullen was bringing up the point of, that we don't have enough agreement to do something beyond an experiment, right? So I think my point was we may all agree on doing something, but we don't have the confidence that it ultimately will work out. And we had enough examples in the past where we were overconfident in the past, and after 10 years, we had deployed this stuff ubiquitously and had to figure out and agree it doesn't work well enough, right? So that's why the aspect I think I wanted to say is that I would love to see a lot more, no overconfidence, start with experimental, but also have the goal in mind that these things should be upgraded, which I think I gave 2 good examples of working groups, and not only the experiments meant to be, finished and be dead afterwards, right? But also as a way in our process to be careful, even if we agree to not be overconfident.
Tom Hill.
Hi there. I think mostly speaking to what Colin said earlier, but I feel as if there's probably an undertone here of there's work going in and being claimed as experimental when there isn't, and we want to try and strengthen the rules around experimental RFCs. I would suspect that if we, in terms of dispatch, if we put this down to a single AD-sponsored RFC, we might lose some of the community discussion around this. And I feel if we shortcut away from perhaps a BOF, losing out on that discussion and why STO shopping happens, and you know why work might, if we don't have it here and we don't see it, sometimes actually that could be a bad thing. It could disappear off into ETSI or the ITUT. Perhaps making sure that we've had the fullness of that conversation with a BOF, maybe doing a little bit more work than the bare minimum, I think could be valuable. Yeah,
I wouldn't want this to go directly from the authors have written a draft to an IETF last call under an AD. It needs something like a mailing list or, as you say, a BOF or whatever to actually push out the discussions.
I think it's a complicated discussion, so I don't think a BOF would be overkill, I think is my main point. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Roman. I'm trying to figure out, I'm getting different opinions about whether this should be AD sponsored or needs more discussion.
Right, yeah, I'm just tripping over this again, so maybe it'll go better next time. Yeah, maybe as a proposal is we create a dedicated mailing list, see where the conversation goes, see how much more conversation we need, and that might decide the course of action, whether we can resolve this through a mailing list conversation, and then we can go to AD sponsorship, or perhaps this is such a broader conversation, we need a different venue. But minting a mailing list, happy to mint you one if that makes sense.
Works for me.
Great, thank you very much. David Skenazy is next on milestones.
All right. Whoa, this is loud. Sorry. Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. All right, my name is David Skenazy, and let's talk about milestones. Next slide, please. Back one, please. Sorry. Perfect, thanks, no worries. So as anyone who's chaired a working group or been involved in the creation of a working group knows, they all have milestones. And that dates back quite a while to RFC 2418, which defined how our working groups operate. And you don't need to read the whole thing, but that RFC defines how a working group defines its charter, and in particular uses milestones heavily in terms of defining what the working group will do and when it will do it. Next slide, please. So why did we do that? Like during chartering, it's particularly useful to know like what the work group is going to work on, and especially ordering. Sometimes at chartering time, we say, okay, you need to finish this before you can start working on extensions, for example. Then further into the life of a working group, it's kind of used for the ADs to keep track of what the working group is doing. And some folks from outside the IETF use it to look into what the working group is doing. Next slide, please. It turns out that using them to know what the working group is doing is a terrible idea. This is an example of the milestones for a working group. So sorry for picking on that particular working group. I looked alphabetically and it was the first one I saw that had out of date ones. But this working group is not the only one. In 2022, Lucas actually measured this with some scripts, and 82% of them were out of date. And more than half of them were more than 2.5 years out of date. So if you're using them to know what's going on, you're getting incorrect information way more than half the time. So they're not serving their purpose in that regards. Next slide, please. So one point about dates, the ISG did an experiment back in 2020, because at the IETF we have process RFCs and we must follow them unless you call something an experiment, and then you can do whatever you want. Pretty great. But we kind of forgot to follow up on this experiment and decide if we wanted to keep doing it or abandon it. So a lot of working groups still to this day have what we call dateless milestones, as in they still have these work items in them, but they don't have dates attached to them, so you don't have to periodically update them all the time. At this point, we should probably decide if this worked out and confirm it process-wise, or say we don't like it and kill it. Next slide, please. So I wrote a draft. The first version of it had like 7 different proposals. We discussed it, I think, on the working group chairs list, which was just a venue for folks who are the ones responsible for updating the milestones and who 82% of the time don't, myself included. And based on that discussion, we kind of landed on one of the proposals. So I kind of rewrote the draft to focus on that proposal. And so what does it say? It's a document that's pretty short. It updates 2418, and it declares that milestones are now optional. It also says that the dates are officially optional. So if you have milestones enabled on that working group, you can make them dateless or with dates. And you can change the granularity of dates as well, because some folks said that month, year was way too precise, but some preferred it. And so the idea is that it puts all of this in control of the responsible AD for the working group. They discuss with the chairs, see what works best with them, and agree on something, decide that. Part of the motivation for that was, at the end of the day, the chairs are the one responsible for updating the milestones, but if they're never going to do that, then maybe we don't need a date in there, or maybe we don't need milestones at all. Milestones, based on the discussion on the list, people are saying they're much more useful in the early days of a working group, but when you have a maintenance working group many years into its existence, they in many cases become less useful. So this makes it on a per working group basis and can be decided. So that way we can have working groups that use them and keep them up to date, that aren't impacted by this change, and working groups that think that they're a waste of time don't have to deal with them anymore. And yes, the document also has some little process tweaks, like allowing the AD to say, yeah, sure, chairs, I don't need to approve every time you update the date, because it turns out that some ADs were forgetting to click the approve button. And it also includes some guidance for chairs. Next slide, please. All right, so do we want to do something with this? The dispatch question. As a process detail, because 2418 was a BCP, updating it requires a BCP, which requires IETF consensus. So our options are having the Gen AD sponsor this, like the 7 documents before it. We're going to start cloning Roman, and it'll be great. Or do it in a working group. So it could be a short-lived working group just for this. It could be a short-lived working group for this and a few of the other proposals that we're discussing in the Gen area. It could be a long-lived working group for Gen area stuff. We could not do this at all or something else. What do y'all think? Bron.
Hi. So I became a working group chair at my first IETF. I had no experience beforehand of what it was to be a working group chair. I went to a working group chairs meeting where milestones were discussed and went, yeah, I should just do that, and did it. And now at the end of every single meeting, we go through the milestones, we update them. They're either useful or they're not. If they're not useful, we shouldn't have them. If they are useful, then it takes 5 minutes once a year to get them updated. Seriously, people, what are we doing? In terms of the dispatch, either AD sponsor and just get it done quick, or dev view random, one of them.
Thank you.
Robert Sparks.
Robert Sparks. Thank you for putting this together, going through the effort to find what I think is a general accepted middle ground. I think you should AD sponsor this document. I think it's in the right place. I would caution very strongly against trying to form a standing group to deal with documents like this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Elliot.
Thanks. To keep it short, what Robert said.
Thank you, Elliot.
Thanks. Pete.
AD sponsor it if Roman is willing to do it. And if it fails, it's for week last call, then go on to the next things. But try it first as an AD sponsor document.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Thanks. Christopher.
I would say I'm happy with AD sponsor or short-lived working group. I don't really care, but not dev null, dev view random, because we are continually producing 50% of useless information, and we should acknowledge that we should, not have to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew.
Hi, Andrew Camping. I do think there'd be value in a long-lived working group for other process stuff in this area, but ironically, if this goes to that, then give it a very short milestone so it's done quickly.
All right, Torlis.
Right, yeah, thank you very much for the work. Maybe one thing, not dispatch feedback, but a section that tries to, you know, pitch who can get what positive things out of what type of these things would be good, right? Because the fact that we do get IETF work done with 82% not using this does give kind of the hint that we may want to make it more flexible, but on the other hand, maybe, you know, the best use of it in the way that you see it or so would help to actually, you know, get more benefit out of them. For example, instead of having these deadlines, you're always trapping over, which is why people, you know, hate to update these things because things run slower than they like. Maybe it's really tracking kind of the obstacles that you did overcome as swiftly as possible, which would help for the ADs, right? In my case, it was we didn't get feedback from that, you know, review working group, or we had a problem with an IANA registry. Yang wasn't working, the tooling wasn't working, right? So all these things that basically have you break these milestones, right? Tracking those might actually be better to the outcome of, for example, then when we go back, say, well, why does IETF take so long? Right, then these milestones, instead of the obstacles overcome, would help us to understand that.
All right, thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. We've got a pretty good queue now, so I think we're going to need to close it. Richard Barnes.
Yeah, hi. On the dispatch question, I think this is a fine thing to AD sponsor. On the substance, I would not get rid of milestones entirely. I agree that dates are stupid and we should get rid of them because they're always inaccurate. But I've recently had to deal with an SDO that had no notion of like what has a working group signed up to do beyond its very broad charter. So like having some notion of like what should I expect this working group to do is, I think we should hold on to that. So like keep the milestones, get rid of the dates. It would be my feedback on substance.
Thank you.
Zahed.
Hi, Jahed. So I think on the list, we have things. I think all of them could be done. Like I have the working groups that I actually do have milestones with dates, without dates, and all these things. And it is working group by working group basis. They discuss with me, and then we decide. Like as AD, I decide like what to do. So in that list, in the previous, like what to do, was like everything could be doable with whatever we have. The one thing that is not doable is like you cannot charter right now in working group without milestones. Maybe that's something that you would like to change and say like, okay, that requires some kind of updates in the process kind of thing. And for that, I would go for AD sponsor for faster processing. But rest of the things that you put out there, I think already do. I don't see like anything need to be changed because I'm already doing it my current working group chairs and working groups.
Thank you.
Lucas.
Hey, I think we should do this work. I don't care where it's done, but I would ask that like there's some jank in how to actually manage these undated milestones, and that maybe any work we do is supported by like tooling and code sprint and stuff like that. And I'd like to volunteer some opinions to work on those kinds of things.
Yeah, and just to quickly respond to that, my intent here is to put more flexibility in the process that then we can change the data tracker to make things more user-friendly.
So Warren Kamari, Google Ops AD. I'll note that there are two different types of working groups. Many of them are formed to do something and having a couple of like milestones of you'll do this, you'll do this, you'll do this, and your shutdown works. But for others like maintenance working groups, it doesn't make much sense for milestones. You can have chairs be like, we adopted this document, add it to the milestones, we published it, delete it from the milestones. That's busy work. I don't care where you do it, but you know, there should be flexibility.
Thanks. Yeah, and to clarify, if I didn't say it, this would be on a per working group basis that we would select it, because for that exact reason. Yeah.
Ron.
So this discussion about the busy work thing came up, and that reminded me, the area director has to approve the changes to them. I've never seen an area director not approve the changes to it. It's so much busy work for the area director to go and approve changes. I think we should take that off. If the area director can come and tell the chair, hey, you're doing the wrong thing. If they're weird, maybe send them an email letting them know. But having the area director have to approve changes, that's been a data tracker issue. I've had to chase area directors up weeks afterwards because if they don't see it immediately, they don't get reminders. It's pointless.
Yep, I agree. Thank you.
Bob?
Hi, Bob Hinden. So I support this work. I think AD sponsor would be fine. I think there's what I'm hearing. It seems like lots of people support it. As a working group chair, this would be useful.
Thank you.
All right, what I think I'm hearing is AD sponsored for this. Roman is,
yeah. What? Sorry, I was going to say, can you ask Roman for his opinion?
Yeah. Looking to see if Roman nods his head or not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to AD sponsor this. I don't know if we have consensus on all the details. So my proposal would be, let's make a dedicated mailing list so we could herd all of the conversation on it, mostly because I'd like to get it off the working group mailing list to get broader community consensus. Kind of watching that, I'm not convinced there's that much community on the working group mailing list, and then we can use that to iterate and refine.
That sounds ideal. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks, David. Next is Linda Dunbar. We're doing a little bit of a change because we're finally at the end of the Gen topics.
Good morning. So I'm changing the type of topics. My presentation today, the purpose is really to get some feedback on this type of work. Where is the right home for discussion? And also I'm soliciting some comments and feedback to this proposal. This is about authenticating IP encapsulation header. Next page. So here's the little background. And we have some drafts in the routing area. Is about how do we steer traffic through a backbone. Specifically is for the multi-segment SD-WAN that for enterprises where they have branches far away from each other. Each of them have services hosted in the cloud. And in between them, they also have the IP ESP encapsulated data flow among each other. So there's a desire to be able to steer those traffics through the cloud backbone. So the approach to steer the traffic through the cloud backbone is adding encapsulation header with indicating where you want to enter the cloud gateway and where you want to exit. So you have ingress gateway, you have egress gateway, and then you may have some explicit regions or routers to nodes to traverse through the cloud backbone. So this shows like from A to B that you have encapsulated traffic, and then you add the header from A to go through gateway 2, and with indicating of where you want to go. So the traffic itself is encapsulated. Next page, please. As you see in the payload, the traffic from A to B is already encapsulated, and is a header which is open, which in normal case, like you don't need any kind of validation. You just send it to the gateway 2, and the gateway 2 will be able to look at the header like Geneva header and look at the subtail base included in them, and then be able to traverse through the egress router and send to the destination. However, there'll be some cases where that between the source CPE to the gateway, there may be some security risks or vulnerability. So you want to add some kind of authentication. However, you don't need to add authentication for every flow. You may only add the authentication for selective flows, a specific flow between the 2 points. Here we show that in this red point that, do I have a pointer? No, it's okay. So basically showing that the header authentication basically generated by the source CPE and validated by the cloud gateway. And this authentication code is not on every flow, it's only on selective flow. But to prevent any actor in the middle attack to recognize the flow which is not authenticated. So we, in this draft, we propose to have this field there for the flow which need to be authenticated is the real authentication value. And for the flows that you don't need to authenticate, that you can put a dummy value. So the gateway will not authenticate those values. And bear in mind that the actual payload has authentication integrity check between 2 endpoints, which is generated by A and validated by destination B. Okay, next one. In terms of authentication key distribution, there are several ways documented in the draft. One way is through the secure control channel, because for each site, enterprise site, the CPE has IPsec flow to the cloud, and for the services terminated in the cloud. And however, for any routers, they have limited capacity for processing IPsec encapsulation. So encryption, so that they have like maximum 2 gig or maximum whatever number of flows. And for the traffic between A to B, which is encrypted already, we don't need the cloud gateway to decrypt the traffic and re-encrypt it at the end. So, but they can use the existing control channel, secure control channel, to distribute the key. Another method is through the established secure channel between the gateway and the CPE to exchange the authentication key. The third method documented in the draft is reusing the existing IPsec key and as an input to another function for the key derivation function to generate the key for the authentication code. Next page, please. Okay, so the control plane, basically it is basic by the control plane dictate how many which flow need to do the authentication. Okay, so the main feedback, main thing, objective of this I'm talking today is looking for feedback on where is the good place to discuss this topic. Thank you.
Okay, looking for suggestions. Paul Wouters, thank you.
Paul Wouters, Security AD. Can you explain a bit what, if this is not like one of possible solutions for the Nazar proposal, that the Nazar BOF is coming later in the week?
No, I actually don't know that off my head. No. Okay. Maybe I can stop by your office hour today and then understand a little bit.
Sure.
Okay.
And the one other solution could be that we give you a mailing list and we can talk about this more in the security area.
Okay, thank you.
Jonathan Hoyland is next.
Jonathan Hoyland, Cloudflare. So I looked through the draft, and I know this isn't a dispatch comment, but I'm very confused by the security model here. Who holds the secret keys? Is it every single step along the path?
The secret key is held by managed by the controller.
Please remember that we're discussing not the details of the proposal, but where to discuss.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you. So it's mainly for where I should put this discussion. Where's the home for this discussion?
So the reason why I bring it up is because I think as proposed it doesn't work. So if I'm right, then we should dispatch it to nowhere because it doesn't work. But if I'm not right, then I don't understand where the keys are.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe catch Linda offline about that. Kathleen.
So in terms of dispatch, I'm not as familiar anymore with what existing working groups, like because Geneva must be closed at this point.
Yeah.
Is there an existing one where this could be discussed? Because I think it's worth discussion. There is no security in Geneva itself. You rely on the IPsec layer to do any integrity protection, any authentication. So, I think you're looking to define a mechanism to add in security, and I think that's worth discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Watson Ladd.
Watson Ladd, Akamai. I asked a question to Yoav in the chat, which is, how much of a shoehorn do we need to stick this into IPsec ME? It seems really similar in that you want to have a secure channel that applies to part of the packet. And the draft does mention AH. So maybe that's a fit. I'm not really confident in that.
Okay, I cannot quite
We're
hear.
really having a lot of trouble understanding you, Watson, unfortunately.
Oh, let me try again. Is this better?
Maybe write on the email list or something.
or put in a comment there.
Yeah, Watson, maybe throw in a comment in the chat session because the acoustics, at least at the front of the room here, are not that great. Okay, Deb Cooley.
So I'm going to let Michael Richardson go before me because I want to go last.
Michael, go.
Michael Richardson, what a control freak. Wow. So the mistake we made with AH back in 1995 was that we did not define the behavior when the SPI number was unknown, which means that AH is a header that you ought to just, an extension header in V6 speak, that you ought to just skip if you don't know what it is. And if we had done that right, then we would do using AH, we would use AH when we did send. And this problem that Linda is discussing would be much, much more clearly an AH IPsec problem. We didn't do that, so effectively you need a new header that everyone involved has to know that if they don't have the keys, then they just skip it because it's okay, right? So to that extent, this is not an IPsec problem because we basically made it out of scope. The question that was asked was, who has the keys for this IPsec SA? And she told us it was the SDN controller or something. And so I would say you need to dispatch this. If anywhere, it needs to go to some SDN group.
SDN group?
Something that someone who deals with software-defined networking.
There's such a thing? There's no such
I don't know,
group.
but I'm not that guy. I'm just saying
Okay.
that's why it's not an IPsec working group problem, because effectively there's no update to IKE v2 that you're going to make, and it's not really an ESP that you're going to define. Well, it kind of is, but it isn't. So effectively, what I'm saying is you can't dispatch it that direction. You need to go to some direction of some, I don't know. Like there was an I2 network security function working group at some point that existed. I think it's dead now. But that's what I'm saying is that's the direction I think it has to go.
Okay, thank you.
Can I relay from Jabba?
And Deb, Jonathan Hoyland
Yeah,
joined.
yeah, go
I
ahead, go
think
ahead,
you
go
had must
I
have
mean,
a
again, I
quick
wanna go
follow-up.
Can I just Jabba for Watson?
Yeah, that's fine.
So Watson said, I have poor confidence in this, but this feels very similar to AH from IPsec, and we need a proper key negotiation mechanism.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
so
you.
that's the same thing,
Deb.
right? So I think we're happy to give you a mail list and we can talk about where it goes from here, right? I don't think we're prepared to dispatch this to IPsec ME or anywhere else, but we're happy to give you a mail list and we can talk about it.
Okay, but it sounds like it pretty clearly goes into security area, so.
Until we decide it's not secure, in which case,
Right, good point.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And the final speaker is Sony. And let me stop sharing slides and allow Sony to share theirs. Where did that go? So Sony, you asked to share slides and then it looks like it disappeared again. And we're not hearing any audio.
Okay. Hello.
We see slides and we hear your voice.
Okay. One sec. So we're gonna talk about the URI scheme. So why are we trying to do this work? We found that user info behavior is completely inconsistent across various software. some of it will simply silently strip it before passing it on to other software. Browsers do this. That's the main one we found. Some will warn on it. Some will fail to parse it. Some will refuse to parse it, and some, particularly database, they require it. But this actually causes a problem because this is a bad API. It's inflexible. It only supports username and password. So, and the password is in plain text in the URI. We would like to remove this. We would like to remove user info altogether. And to do that, we need to recognize where user info is still used and required today. We don't believe the user info syntax can be solved. We basically try to reuse user info for non-authentication and authorization purposes. And we ran straight into those inconsistencies, and yeah. So we started looking deeper, and that's how we found out that's how we got here. We tried to discuss this on the ART mailing list. Not much happened there. Obviously, there are still some things we need to figure out, like we really think there should be some sort of we really think there should be some sort of integration with credential storage, system-wide, application-specific, or something, the language runtime. We don't really know. We don't really know how to advance this work. We're thinking a work group, but we don't know.
Great. Justin has joined the queue. So.
Hi, Justin Richer. Is this a problem that actually needs to be solved? So I've, in the last 30 seconds, skimmed through the draft. And it has a bunch of examples in it, which basically amount to moving the user portion of a URI out to a separate parameter, and then shoving the rest of the original URI tacked on to the end using a new syntax. And I'm not convinced that this type of shuffling of existing data is actually going to solve a problem that people actually have. And we can't just stop using the user info section of the authority section of URIs. Like we're not just going to turn that off. So that's still going to be around, even if this also exists to do it in a different way. So I'm not convinced it solves a problem that we have, and I'm not convinced it actually solves the problem that it proposes. So my suggestion for dispatch would be nothing.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Do we have other opinions on this? think this probably applies largely to the new WIT area, right? Daniel. Oops, disappeared again. All right, it's pretty quiet here. Do we have any opinions that, huh? Oh, Nick Doty, good. Just in the nick of time, sorry.
Thanks. I was hoping for a little more explanation of this last point. I don't understand what the integration with wallets or password managers would be with a URI scheme, or do I not understand? Or I'm confident I don't understand, so please explain.
So basically, when you have we're gonna go back a slide or two. In the case of a database specifically, depending on the database, you only have the URI as the API. So if you wanna use, say, certificates, public keys, that kind of stuff, you kinda can't. Or if you don't wanna put the password in the URI, you also can't. So that's the idea would be to see if there's some sort of interest in a language level API that integrates with this URI.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on.
Daniel.
Yes, this is Daniel Smolin, Cable Labs. So I'm going to make some bold assumptions that I truly understand this, but in order to kind of test those assumptions, I'm going to cite the dark literature of RFC 3986. So in section 7.6, semantic attacks, it seems that the real sort of problem that exists, and the example that's in there, is that one could spoof, you know, a set of subdomains or even more or less a full URL. In that sort of user ID or user info rather subcomponent immediately prior to the actual URL. And I think that, you know, in my opinion, you know, the goal of this work is to essentially solve that semantic attack problem. And so I do believe that that is in fact a problem. The reason being that, you know, with the syntax being essentially unconstrained, one could put really anything in there. And so you know, some sort of further constraints may be warranted. Again, I don't think that it's worth discussing the particular technical approach, but I do see this as a problem. And so I would push that maybe there should be some sort of working group on this, perhaps.
Okay, any further thoughts? I'm thinking this is probably in the WIT area. Do we have one of the ADs there that has an opinion, perhaps? Evidently not.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Ah, yes, thank you.
Yeah, Francesca Palombini, as with AD, I would be interested in hearing more feedback, more discussion, more people interested. I haven't heard many people today before making any decision. Yeah, there is a question: are URIs with or art? That's a good question. But yeah, we should probably find a venue for polling more feedback and see if there is any interest to discuss this and continue this.
Got a couple more people in the queue now, so thank you. Martin?
Yeah. Martin Thompson. It's not clear to me whether this is a generic URI problem or a problem that's specific to particular types of URIs or particular schemes. which complicates this considerably. The sort of use of user info in HTTP URIs is basically dead in many ways and exactly as summarized, but that's not true for other types of schemes. And it looks like this is an attempt to solve a problem for HTTP, so that group might be engaged in the work. I do, however, see URIs as broadly belonging more to the art area when it comes to that. So if it is a more general thing, then art somewhere would need to get involved. I'm lacking clarity on the problem based on the draft and the presentation, though.
Okay,
Yep.
and then Miria is next.
Yeah, Mia Kuliman here. So just listening to the conversation, I don't think we understand the problem well enough yet. So I don't think this is ready to dispatch. So basically, or to say it the other way around, I would dispatch just to a site meeting and have more discussion about the problem.
Okay, it sounds like more discussion is needed. I'm not quite sure what the venue for that discussion should be. Any thoughts? Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
A site meeting, they should just organize a site meeting, get some interested people, those people who spoke up at the queue, and have more discussion there.
Hi, Roman Janilio. This is not my area, so I'm looking at Zahed and kind of Francesca. Is there a WIT specific list that might be helpful here? And I would just point out procedurally, side meetings have no official standing in this process, so we cannot dispatch officially anything to side meetings because they aren't a thing in the IETF standards process.
Right. There is a WIT area at IETF.org. That's the general WIT mailing list. And also I would rather see a discussion in a mailing list that can be, pointed back to and recorded rather than side meetings.
So just to add to what Francisca said, Jaya there, with another WIT area. So I think the WIT area could be used as an announcement, but the discussion should happen separately. And obviously we can give it to a mailing list if they need. But I actually agree with Miria, like this need to be socialized and discussed to understand a bit better. So mailing list, we can create a non-working group mailing list for this one to facilitate this one. So if that is what is needed, I can help with that.
Okay, thank you very much. Sonny, does that help you?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Thank you. We're at just about at the end of the session. I want to take a minute for Roman to speak. Actually, let me, and then I want to just kind of go through a quick summary of the actions. Okay, quick summary of the actions. Items 1 and 2, expert review and hybrid IANA. It sounded like it was a new working group, maybe for those two topics combined. Gender representation, AD sponsored by Roman. List management procedures sounded like it needed a working group, hopefully a short duration one, but that's aspirational, as I said. Experimental RFCs, it sounds like it was perhaps a BOF and creation of a mailing list to discuss further. Milestones, AD sponsored. Lightweight IP header authentication. We'll try and find an existing working group, but it sounds like it needs more discussion within the SEC area to decide exactly where that lands. And the last one, it sounds like it needs more mailing list discussion, probably on a WIT general list, at least initially. So thank you very much. And Roman, please.
Can you quickly reconfirm? You said for the Nomcom gender topic, it's AD sponsored because that's. There was a lot of discussion about creating working groups. I'm not sure that was as clear.
Oh,
as
I'm
you put
sorry.
it.
I had two notes here and working. Yeah,
That is
actually, I had
exactly.
working group circled, and I got that wrong. Yes, that should be a working group. Thank you for correcting me on that.
So first, I want to thank kind of the chairs for facilitating all of this, and Francesca, who is remote but helped was the responsibility to really help pull this together. As we mentioned in IETF 119, it is an experiment for us to combine all of the dispatch working groups into one place with the idea to do it once with as large of an audience as possible. But we are running this as an experiment, and we promised we would do it exactly kind of twice and make some decisions going out from here. So the IESG welcomes all feedback. Please send it to ISG@IETF on what you thought about this particular approach, because we would like to decide for IETF 121 whether we go back to the old way of having lots of different dispatch groups across areas, or whether we continue with this approach or something in between. Thanks.
All right, thank you, and we are adjourned.